السيدات والسادة.
Ladies and gentlemen, the 16th plenary meeting of the General Assembly is called to order. It gives me great pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Vladimir Makei, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Belarus.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we live in paradoxical times when optimism and pessimism characterize our lives equally. Indeed, just recently we adopted such landmark documents as the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Climate Agreement. At the end of this year, the international community will give the green light to two more instruments that inspire particular hope for changing the situation in the world for the better, namely the Global Compact on Refugees and Migrants. The implementation of these singular initiatives is intended to transform human life on the globe in a drastic way to ensure that globalization is equitable and win-win to eradicate poverty and preserve the planet for future generations. The search for answers to global challenges, quest for ways to reach common objectives clearly shows that no country can do this alone. There can be no individual progress without collective progress. This is why, no matter how justified the criticism against the United Nations may be, we still need the organization as a unique platform for cooperation, as an efficient multilateral tool based on principles that guarantee equal and respectful treatment for each and every country, its priorities and needs. In order to assist states in achieving the ambitious goals of the 2030 Agenda, we need effective UN country teams on the ground, ones that can effectively help countries reach results in moving towards sustainable developments. And this is where we see the essence of UN reform. Ladies and gentlemen, pursuing a globalization that would ensure everyone's interests and managing this globalization for the common good is a key objective in the modern world. Yet we are seeing evident difficulties in this area. Globalization is being accompanied by new geopolitical and geo-economic fault lines, not only on the regional but also on the global scale. A kind of civilizational trap is emerging in which the demand for integration goes hand in hand with manifestations of fragmentation, protectionism, and indeed even confrontation. Located in the heart of Europe, Belarus is on the one hand a member of the Eurasian Economic Union, and on the other is interest in pursuing intensive economic cooperation with the European Union. Squeezed between two geopolitical power centers, we fully feel the interplay between geopolitics and geoeconomics. The conflict in Ukraine and rising tensions in the region's sanctions and counter-sanctions weigh heavily on our country, if not directly, then indirectly, leading to substantial economic losses. As a medium-sized country with one of the most open economies in the world, because we export up to 60-70% of our GDP, Belarus is heavily dependent on external markets and international trade. And this is one of the reasons we consistently support building a fair, predictable, and non-discriminatory trade and economic architecture, both in Europe and in other regions, one that would be aligned with the interests of all countries. And we believe that it should be underpinned by the implementation of multi-tier integration projects. Owing to its geographical location, Belarus is particularly interested in closer cooperation between the Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union. Indeed, our western border remains the only economic border on the huge space stretching from Lisbon to Vladivostok and in the future perhaps even Shanghai. This is why Belarus has consistently advocated for the integration of integrations as the principle of cooperation that aims to find optimal ways to bring together economic growth and sustainable development. Achieving the goals of the Sustainable Development Agenda with its overarching promise to leave no one behind requires a particular focus and international support for middle-income countries. Indeed, it is this group of countries that is home to 5 of the 7 billion that comprise the world's population, and it wields the greatest potential for economic growth and ensuring global sustainability. On the other hand, it is within this group of countries that 3/4 of the world's poor reside, and they are the most vulnerable to such factors as global economic fluctuations, consequences of regional conflicts, natural and man-made catastrophes, climate upheavals, epidemics, which all threaten social and economic stability and exacerbate inequality, including at the regional and global levels. And in this context, it is unjust that development progress continues to be gauged exclusively on the basis of per capita income. That criterion does not reflect the economic, social, nor environmental features inherent to middle-income countries. For Belarus, it is evident that the multi-dimensional nature of the threats faced by countries of this category, including our country, requires multi-dimensional development criteria that would also be instrumental in designing the UN system's result-oriented strategies. Belarus hopes that the high-level meeting to comprehensively discuss these issues, which the President of the General Assembly plans to convene in the near future, will provide a serious impetus for United Nations to design and implement specific measures in this area. Ladies and gentlemen, another multidimensional issue is increasingly coming to the forefront. Humanity has entered a new era as digital technologies are drastically transforming our lives. The importance of the digital economy for sustainable, comprehensive economic growth is something that our country understands very well. Last March, the presidential decree titled on the development of the digital economy entered into force, and it seeks to turn Belarus into an IT country. Our high technology park is developing rapidly, and it has shown record rates of growth both in terms of the number of residents and in terms of its exports. Digital technologies are justly compared to rocket fuel for national economies. They allow for the rapid introduction of innovations into various areas of human activity, such as education, the consumer market, social cooperation. They stimulate business activity, generate revenues, and create jobs. At the same time, digitization will lead to drastic changes on the labor market and the disappearance of a whole number of professions that will no longer be required in these new conditions. They will put those employed in those sectors in danger and make them vulnerable. It is evident that governments in developed and many developing countries will soon face the challenge of how to adapt their economies to the processes of international digitization and how to effectively manage these processes on the national level, as well as how to address unintended negative impacts of digitization. In this regard, we would propose that the UN establish international cooperation on digitization and technological forecasting for sustainable development. The purpose of such cooperation would be to assist developing countries in finding their own niche in the global digital economy, as well as multiply the benefits of digitization and ensure that they are distributed equitably. We welcome the establishment of the high-level panel on digital cooperation under the auspices of the Secretary General, and we hope that it will pay particular attention to the issue of capacity building in this area. It is absolutely clear that capacity building here is impossible without shared sustainability and prosperity. This is the fundamental basis of those tasks that the world's governments can only address together. Unfortunately, these values are often sacrificed to confrontational thinking, which we are seeing more and more often. At the 2015 UN summit, the president of Belarus spoke about the impossibility of achieving sustainable development without lasting peace and security, and this remains very relevant today. True sustainability cannot be achieved outside a strong security framework whose strength is indeed being tested day in and day out. One shared threat we face is terrorism. Combating it requires a comprehensive approach whereby all countries would uphold the principles of international law and avoid double standards. We welcome and stand willing to support the efforts of UN leaderships to mount a common front against terrorism. Our country's contribution to global processes in this area will be to convene a high-level international conference on preventing terrorism in the digital age, which we'll organize jointly with the OSCE in Minsk, the capital of Belarus, in a week's time on October 9th and 10th. Ladies and gentlemen, turning to the issue of international security in general, we must once again note the evidence. The world is once again facing unprecedented threats and challenges. Confrontation in international relations leads to more and more mentions of a new Cold War. We are more frequently hearing about the threat of use of weapons of mass destruction, even if this were to happen as a result of inadvertent actions. This points to a crisis in diplomacy and seriously undermines the authority of the UN as the key international organization tasked with preventing international conflicts. The degree of divergence in relations and views between a number of great powers in the world has reached a boiling point. The situation indeed is becoming absurd in certain aspects. Key bodies of the UN and the Security Council, first and foremost, are turning into an arena for confrontation and political grandstanding and self-assertion, with confrontation prevailing over dialogue and geopolitical ambitions taking the upper hand over common sense. Like many in this hall, I regrettably do not have any recipes for how to fix this situation, but we are deeply convinced that there is no other way other than to forge a global order based on shared values. It is patently clear, however, that these shared values cannot be arrived at by means of forcing through democracy and any action that undermines legitimate authority. The bitter geopolitical experience of the past 3 decades shows that these values must be built on something that is the reflection of common interests. And we believe that the idea of stability could serve as such a unifying paradigm. Stability means putting an end to the unwinding spiral of geopolitical chaos. What needs to be done for this? First of all, stability implies that states retain their role as primary international actors and that state sovereignty is respected. It is these fundamental principles enshrined in the fundamental documents of the United Nations that form the foundation of contemporary international law. On the one hand, this reflects the freedom of states to choose their own form of political governance as well as their own path and priorities of development. On the other hand, it means the non-interference of states in each other's internal affairs. Unfortunately, these principles are not universally adhered to in today's world. Sanctions, economic coercion, and political isolation with regards to so-called rogue regimes have become a tool that is often used in foreign policy today. We have all been witness to decade-long policies of economic trade and financial blockade against the freedom-loving state of Cuba, which not only runs counter to UN resolutions, but takes a heavy toll on that country's social and economic development. Secondly, stability is also about strengthening the state and its role in its domestic affairs. We are absolutely convinced that only a strong state can provide security and ensure the well-being of its population. We believe that people living in places where real, firm authority is absent could testify to this being true more than anyone else. So if we are all truly interested in ensuring global stability, we should seek not to undermine the state, but rather to strengthen it. Finally, stability very much relates to relations among the great powers, which today must once again learn to listen to each other and to hear each other's arguments and be willing to embrace reasonable compromises. In the past, it was these great powers that determined the destiny of the planet. Today, they no longer enjoy such an exclusive prerogative. Still, concordance among great powers and agreement on shared values, as well as leadership in advancing them, is the sine qua non for progress in many areas. It is in the spirit of this logic that the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, last year advanced the initiative to begin a new international dialogue on security matters. The objective of this would be to overcome existing disagreements that plague interstate relations in the Euro-Atlantic and Eurasian space. We are convinced that only dialogue along those lines can help resolve the deep crisis of trust that currently exists in international relations and lead to mechanisms that would truly serve to strengthen international peace and security as well as ensure sustainable development. Mr. President, can one day or one meeting change history? The great Indian leader Jawaharlal Nehru called this moment a tryst with destiny. I think that our common task is to increase the number of such moments. We must pool our efforts to find common solutions that will be acceptable to everyone. I thank you for your kind attention.
أرجو أن أتوجه بالشكر.
I would like to thank His Excellency Vladimir Makei, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Belarus. And now it gives me great pleasure and honor to give the floor to His Excellency Dr. Aldirdiri Mohammed Ahmed to address the General Assembly.